Okay, I think if we have any streamers, I don't know who they are, which is good because this is the beginning of the React week, the first React week, and not gonna lie, React's gonna be pretty difficult. I think it is. It's gonna be a lot, but today we're gonna go through class pretty slow. So we'll go through the examples real slow. We'll go through a lot of them together. Give you plenty of time to get used to it, which is gonna be nice. But I'm really excited. I think this is gonna be one of the more interesting weeks for everyone. We finally got monitors back, so that's good. That's a good step in the right direction. So the other thing is, at the end of class Saturday, I said the ES6 stuff that we covered, I'm not really going to talk about it anymore because it's just kind of expected that you know. Honestly, that's just the way it's going to be from now on with React. You pretty much use that stuff with everything. It is what it is. So we don't have time to like step back and go, oh, what is this again? Like, unfortunately, we kind of just got to push through it. And if there's something you forgot, you have to go back and check it again. Because React has its own new slew of tools that we're going to learn. So that's cool. Anyway, it's going to be a fun week, I think. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So I have this slideshow. Obviously, it's going to start with some, usual Trilogy stuff. Oh, you're going to be learning so much, and we'll see. Anyway, welcome to React.js. You don't treat this class as a spoon-feeding session. Instead, it's meant to be an immersion and exposure, and that's true. Today's class is going to be slow, it's not going to be like super fast-paced or anything, and that's okay. We don't want it to be because React's real different, so learning it is pretty tough. I remember the first time when I was starting to learn it, it felt overwhelming, not because React itself is overwhelming necessarily, but the environment is, because there's a lot to this. We have React and Babel and Webpack and potentially all kinds of other things that you have all going on at once, and if you're doing this on your own, you kind of got to know all of them at once and figure them all out together, and that's really a pain. It's quite difficult. Yeah, it can definitely be hard, and it's a huge mindset shift when it comes to building apps. That's true. It really is. This is completely different than anything we've done so far. We're going to need to practice a lot. That's absolutely true. There's plenty of examples to go through, but thankfully we're getting 3 weeks of this instead of 2. Definitely worth it. React's amazing. Just about every popular UI library that came after React borrows from it. May or may not be true, but whatever. So what is React? Let's get down to the nitty-gritty, I guess. It's an open source JavaScript library developed at Facebook, specifically for developing nice user interfaces. So React was built with the idea that you're going to have, one page of HTML. You're going to be changing your HTML a lot because there's going to be a lot of data. Data moving fast, changing the system frequently, a lot going on at once, And so React is kind of built for that, to be very scalable with lots of data moving through your UI at once. React has a component-based architecture, so we'll see as we move forward, but everything's built into small chunks, which is really quite nice. None of this big, huge HTML page where you gotta kind of sift through it and figure out all the little details where you might have messed up. If you're doing it well, React should be small bits that you just kind of compose into one final file. Facebook's UI is a good example. They have a lot of React on there. It's not all React. I don't think it might be now, but the messenger is going on. You can have multiple messages. You can have the list of who's online. You have notifications. You have the wall. All kinds of stuff going on Facebook's UI, and React helps it happen seamlessly without the page refreshing. A lot of things we've done so far required the page to refresh a lot, right? You click a button, it refresh the page, everything would load again. And that's all well and good. That's how the web was for a really, really long time. And then the internet got faster, computers got faster, and we're like, hey, well, wouldn't it be better if we could just keep everything on the, on the client, and then when we needed to change it, just respond to changes in data, right? And that's kind of what's happening with React. We don't refresh the page anymore. There's no need to, because we have this single page app with React that can just change with the data very elegantly. So what do these components look like, and what kind of components could there be? Well, from everything to your page could be one component, down to the smallest thing like a title or a little list box or something along those lines. and they kind of compose themselves down to the smallest back up to the biggest. So your homepage might have 2 sections, right? Or it could have an employee page and an employee list or something like that that are also components. And in those components, we could have the employees, and inside the employees, we could have the employee title and employee description or employee, bio or whatever, employee photo, right? And all of those can be self-encompassing, and they can be as granular or as coarse as you would like them to be, depending on your style with React. But the point is, you can make them into really nice, clean, reusable components where you can just drop it in when you need it, and you're good to go. No changes need to be made. They can live in isolation. That's how they should be done. It doesn't always end up that way. But as you get better with React, you'll notice that you start to get down to that kind of a structure where everything is very reusable and very easy to just put where it needs to go without a lot of extra work. So again, why are these important? Because they're small, they're isolated, they're easy to test individually. You can see if there's a bug in one little area, you can track down the component it might exist in. Also, it's easier to compose these large apps, these very complicated apps that are going to respond to lots of data changes. So data shifting applications. So in our traditional web page that we've been building so far, you've got this crazy jQuery spaghetti where you build all these event handlers and you build all the stuff that's going on with jQuery, and as data changes, one-to-many event handlers could be fired, and those could trigger one-to-many AJAX requests, which call to your server, and they're just real messy, right? And you don't really know what's going on at any one time because so much could be triggered by anything. And each jQuery event handler or just JavaScript event handler is kind of doing its own thing in isolation, which may be nice, but when you have to deal with the overall app changing at once, in particular you have a bunch of data coming in and a bunch of data changing, it might be more effective just to aggregate a bunch of stuff that's changing at once and then deal with it all at one time. So React style is kind of like, we have all these event handlers that we're prepared for, and then we notice that something about the app changes, and then we just, boom, re-render the whole thing at once. As opposed to worrying about the spaghetti of everything that could go on. You could step on your own toes with event handlers doing stuff. It's much more elegant in that regard. So JavaScript is really fast, and jQuery is really fast. However, every time you change the DOM with jQuery, we have to go back out and we have to redraw everything, right? So it has to recalculate where all the HTML goes, it has to reapply the CSS, it has to do a whole bunch of stuff. Unless you're really good about it, odds are you're going to get a lot of extra re-renders that are very inefficient, and your app just isn't quite as smooth. It's pretty rare, and we haven't done anything in our case where that's actually going to affect you until you get to a large-scale app that has a lot of data moving. For us, we can manage it. It's totally possible, no big deal. But if you got to an enterprise-level app, like Carvana, for instance, they use React. You get something like Carvana where you've got hundreds of requests going out with every action that a user might do. It becomes a mess, and it's kind of impossible. Actually, it's just the reality is it's impossible to manage that kind of an application with something like jQuery. So we've come up with better solutions. So React has this thing called the virtual DOM. So you can think of it sort of like when we're doing jQuery and we're building these strings of, say, a table. And we would, build this element, create it with jQuery, and then we would append it to something. Well, imagine you just built the whole table as one string and then just dumped it in with one jQuery append or something like that. Well, the virtual DOM's kind of like that. React keeps everything that it's going to build with HTML in memory at once, and then at some interval, it's like, boom, replace it all. It decides, and it just replaces the whole thing for you once, so you don't have all these calculations happening at the same time, and you don't have all these extra hits to the DOM. So it can be way more efficient with rewriting to the DOM and make renders faster and more effective. And that's kind of one of the breakthroughs that we've been getting to over and over the years of these single-page apps. There are things before React. There was AngularJS, the original one. There was, Knockout and Backbone and all these things that did similar things, but they didn't do quite as well, and they didn't have the kind of the pizzazz that React has, be it good or bad. So that's kind of the advantage we get with React. We can take all of this crazy stuff, this nonsense that's happening every time we want to make a change to the UI, and we can aggregate it into one nice, elegant sort of operation. You may be thinking, what is the virtual DOM? As I just said, basically it's effectively, really simplified version, it's a giant string of the HTML that's going to be eventually replaced on the DOM. Not necessarily that, it's a little bit more complicated, but you could imagine it that way and you'd be okay right now. So we build it all up and then we apply it at once. So the pros of React and the cons of React. The pros, it's component based, so we have nice reusable pieces of code to build and compose our UI. The application UI reactively updates to changes in state or with data, and it can manipulate the DOM very effectively. We can use it to build apps for the web. We can do native mobile apps now with React, which is awesome. You can have server-side rendering with React, which is fantastic if you're really into SEO and optimizing, how search engines work with your web page. And it's easier to learn and more popular than competing front-end frameworks. That's debatable. More popular, yeah, sure. Easier to learn. That is a subject of debate, and I'm not going to say it is or it isn't. Cons, React is just a view library. So it really only has to do with rendering the page. That's it. If you want to do other things like deal with HTTP requests in a very sophisticated way or manage state or something along those lines, you really can't just use React. You got to add stuff on top of it, which is both a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it's not opinionated. It does not tell you how to do these things, but it's a bad thing because it's not opinionated and everyone does them differently. So, pros and cons. Setting up React does take a lot of configuration. Things like Angular, it's just install it, ng-serve, boom, you've got an Angular app done. But with React, it's a create React app helps, but it's usually not the way people like it. It's very much a beginner way to build a React app, and some people use it, some people just hate it and trash it, right? But that's because React's so flexible, you can kind of do whatever you want. And again, I'm going to stress, I don't know if as many people will stress that that's a huge con in my opinion, because that means you could be a React expert, walk into someone else's shop, and they go, oh, we do it totally the other way. And you're like, oh, Jesus. So not that you won't be able to figure it out pretty easily once you understand React. It's just there's so many differing opinions on how to do literally every little thing. It's kind of nauseating. And that's my biggest con with React. I love React, don't get me wrong, but that is going to be the biggest thing you're going to run into. It's going to be different everywhere you see it. So it sounds pretty magical other than the huge gripe I just had with it. What do you need to get started? Well, we already learned about Babel on Saturday, and we saw a little bit about what it does. It's a transpiler, right? So we have this special syntax with ES6 or whatever. Our browser can't quite support it natively. So we take our code, we run it through Babel, and Babel just magically knows, okay, I can run it, right? It figures out a way to turn that into JavaScript that's compatible with our underlying system, and it works. On top of that, we have something called Webpack. So Webpack is a module bundler. So what it does is basically takes all of your code you write on your UI, bundles it into one JavaScript file, and sends it on out to the internet, right? So you may have 50 JavaScript files or React files or whatever to build your application, and Webpack's like, boom, put it into one, ship it out. It's way more efficient with one. You can minify that one giant file. It's real clean. So Webpack does that, and it does a lot of other transformations for you. You can also have a more standard interface because Webpack can use things like Babel to allow you to write code that's very similar to how you would in Node, or use imports and exports or something like that. So it's basically a library that helps facilitate a lot of transformations on your code. It doesn't really do anything itself. It has all these plugins that help you do things. And Babel, again, is our transpiler. It's used to change our newer syntax that we wish we had in every browser and every Node ecosystem into the code we actually have, which is depressing and sad. Can I just use a CDN for all this? So we all remember CDNs? Content Delivery Networks, right? Sure, you absolutely can, but it's not really a great idea. It's fine for testing. It's fine for development, but in production it may not be a good idea. Especially if you don't have a very reliable connection to that CDN, because there's a lot going on with React, and the React packages are kind of large, and some of the bundlers can do things called tree shaking, where they take code you don't use and they just say, we don't need that in the app, and so they take it out. We can't do that with a CDN. Granted, React's pretty small, so I don't know that it tree shakes anything out of React. But even so, there's things you just can't do, and it's not really the best thing to do. So, digging into the docs, what we're going to do next is I'm going to send you out some links to the React documentation, and I'm going to have you pretty much work with your groups, whatever, and just kind of like get used to it, read through it, kind of get a feel for what's going on with React before we actually dive into our first example together, and make sure you install those 2 packages that I've slacked out. Before we get going, does anyone have any questions? Okay. Activity number 1 has a bunch of questions in it. I want you to go through the React docs and try to answer as many of those as you can with the people around you. And that's what we're going to do first. Yes? Yeah, so the yarn launch on every new application, you're going to have your own yarn launch. Like you would have as well. Right? But you install yarn globally, it's just like NPM.
And it's like install normally with dependencies.
Yep. Instead of NPM installer, you use yarn add. So it's slightly different.
You use the
You don't have to, but it's recommended with React. It's just what people normally do. You don't have to. No.
I can go to the package.
You can get every package through NPM. But you don't want to mix the two. Either use NPM or use ARM. Yarn. Make your mind up, right? But you can use either one. I think, well, Create React App does. So, we should probably use Yarn today. It's not that much different. There's slightly different commands, but we're going to see it a lot in the React ecosystem. I should at least know about it. Yeah, I did. I read it. I meant to comment, but it looks pretty cool. I'll have to check that out. The deep in or whatever.
I haven't read it yet, but I saw the red line.
I see. Clickbait.
I read I was driving, so I read the first paragraph.
Oh, even better. You're driving and you copied a link
Oh,
to
yeah.
it. Okay.
Well, I was at a red light.
Oh, okay. I see.
I'm not responsible. So yarn is just another
Effectively.
that we installed through NPM.
Yep. There's more too. There's Bower, JSPM. There's a couple other System.js.
Inception.
There's a lot. This is one of the running jokes with the community because when they first started coming out, there were so many of them, and no one knew which one would win. But NPM was always like the base.
So if I don't want to have that yarn, I just have to install globally that React.
Tell you what, use Yarn. You don't need to, but just do it because when I have to help you because Yarn didn't work or something, NPM forgot something or whatever, then I'll be like, damn it, Adam. That won't happen because they work effectively the same these days. Because all the nice things Yarn did to make NPM better, NPM has now retroactively added. So
Difference only if I want to install the dependency instead of npm, I'm just gonna type first and the name of that.
yeah, and instead of npm install, you just type yarn. And instead of npm install some package name, you just do yarn add package name. So you can't be like yarn package name, you have to say yarn add package. But yarn is the same as just npmi.
Yeah. So add instead of install,
Yes.
and it's say that it's
Yarn add and then yarn add dash dash dev.
So are you saying Facebook would need to
No, they do. Alright, let's go ahead and go over these questions. So I did slack out the answers, but try not to look at them yet. Okay, so the first thing, everyone get it installed? Everyone get Create React App and Yarn installed? No problems? Cool. Okay, so the React docs are out there for you to check out, and as you probably saw, it's very different from everything we've done so far. So let's just see if we can answer some of these questions off the cuff, right? In the previous section, we just installed 2 packages, Create React App and Yarn. What are they for? Who knows? Anyone? Yarn is a package manager, and Create React App is used to create React apps. Wow. Very good. Thank you, Adam. What are some of the benefits of using React.js? You get components. It's composable, right? You have a more elegant way of updating the DOM, so it's more efficient, better rendering, stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty more. Let's see. What is a React component? Starts as a function, yeah. A React component is basically a wrapper around HTML elements. It's a container for the elements that the component's going to effectively represent in the virtual DOM. What is the significance of React DOM.render? That is where, yep. What was that?
It's where you update the node size DOM.
Yes, so React DOM.render is what you call to actually render the React's virtual DOM for the first time. Sort of. It's more like document write. So you know, document write, we can replace the whole DOM. But it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. But after it is kind of like the document writing, right? Or I would say the React code you put inside of it is waiting for the document.ready. What is JSX and why does Facebook recommend using it? JavaScript XML, yeah. Why does Facebook represent what? Right. Yeah, so JSX looks a lot like HTML, right? And so it allows us to pretty much embed our HTML into these JavaScript files, and the primary reason behind it was, you know, your UI is your UI, and all the code related to your UI is still part of your UI, so why do we separate it into all these different files and make it more work on ourselves? Now, this is probably the biggest point of contention for people who do and do not like React, is this JSX syntax. Oh, you can embed your HTML into a JavaScript file. Old school people would be like, oh, well, that's not a separation of concerns. Your HTML and your JavaScript are in the same file. That's ridiculous. People who are into React are like, oh, that is not violating separation of concerns because they all have to do with the UI. Honestly, jury's out. I have no idea if it does or doesn't. I don't really care. I think it's nice for what it is. I also don't mind the other way. So, I don't know. Depends on how I feel that day, I guess. But it is very powerful. And Facebook likes it, and they recommend it because it does make the HTML seem very apparent in what it's going to do, and it's also you know, not taking anything out of that file. Everything that needs to be compiled for that HTML related to that file is all there, right, in one file, so it's nice and convenient. What does Facebook recommend is the best way to start building a new React single-page application? Anyone? I gotta look that up. I don't know. There you go. Or you could do that with the CDN. So the CDN's one, or using Create React App is another. What is Babel, and what role does it play in converting JSX to vanilla JavaScript? Well, anyone want to wager a guess? As we said, Babel's our... What was that? Well, it's our transpiler, right? It is a compiler, but we call it a transpiler because it takes the JSX, turns it into actual valid JavaScript so we can use it. What is the significance of the curly braces in JSX? It's where you execute JavaScript. It's very similar to the template literals that we were learning with ESX, right? Where you just embed variables and stuff and expressions into your JSX. What is a component prop? It's like the properties, the attributes that your HTML elements are eventually going to have. So I select that out. You can reference that if you'd like. But let's dive into a React example together first. Does anyone, before we move on, have any questions about anything we've seen yet, or React, or anything that's going on? Okay, well, let's go ahead and dive into an example then. You can follow along if you want, but no, don't follow along on this one. The next one, I'm not going to have you do on your own. I'm going to do it with you guys, and I want you to follow along on that one. So this one, just go ahead and watch. So I can go to my D drive, Trilogy, example. All right, so we installed Yarn and create React app, right? So we want to create a new React application. React recommends you use create React app. What you do is create -react-app in your terminal, and then the name of the application, which it will create a directory for, and then all this magical stuff starts happening. Tells you a little bit about what you can do. Kind of cut off there. But it says you can use yarn start, yarn build, yarn test, yarn inject, and all this fun stuff. CD into my app and type yarn start, and you can go ahead and get going. So why don't we do that? Oh, whoops. I've got that the presentation still up. All right, so we run it. It says it's starting the server. It opens up Chrome to this. Ta-da! React. We're done. Let's wrap it up.
Nice. See you on Wednesday.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's actually look at the code, though. I'm going to close that really quick. We're going to go check out this code. Okay, so first, I want to look at the project structure a little bit before we actually dive into the code. So this is created from Create React App, okay? So it's just, boom, boilerplate for us. It's got a nice git ignore with a bunch of stuff in it of things that you don't want to commit. So it has your node modules and all that, because we're going to commit those on accident every now and then. Comes with a basic README telling you about some of the resources related to React App, Create React App. So if you want to look anything up, you can. Has this yarn lock, so this is very similar to our package lock.json that NPM creates. Yarn had this idea first. Well, it wasn't new to them, but they created these lock files so that the dependencies, they're a little bit more static in terms of sharing the code, right? So you always commit your package lock and you commit your yarn lock to your repo, but this is very similar to the package lock. And then we still have our package JSON. Has only a few dependencies here: React, React DOM, and React scripts. And you can see the scripts section just has some scripts that we can use. So if I do yarn start or npm run start, it's going to run this right here. Same with npm run build or yarn build. Same right here. npm test, yarn test, so on and so forth. Anyway, these are specialized scripts to run this Create React app for us, so we don't have to set up like a dev server or anything, or do hot reloading or anything like that. So these are the basic files in the root, and then we have two main directories. So node modules obviously is created when we do the install. So when you type yarn or npm install, node modules is created. There is a public folder, has a little icon for us. That's it. It's just a little icon. The Create React app one. And then this is all of our HTML. Now this is more than you'd usually see because there's comments, but really this is all of our HTML. That's it. That's React. Woohoo, we're done. Because this is a single page application and we use the React DOM, it's going to basically take this root element and just replace it with whatever React says we need. So your initial page is effectively nothing. It's one div tag, right? But it's under this public folder in the Create React app. And then there's this manifest JSON. This is mainly used for mobile apps. So you can like create links to your web page and stuff, and it just gives some information about the app. It's not that important. It just is made with it. You can update it, change it, whatever. But this is, you know, the gist of your static content that's actually sent to the browser. The only other thing you get is when you build, you actually get, you know, a JavaScript file that has all of your React code. Everyone with me so far? Any questions? Cool. So in the source is where we get to the meat and potatoes of React. So here there are several classes. Service Worker JS, not important. That's something that comes with Create React App, so don't worry about it. The entry point to our application right here is this, index.js. And you'll see immediately when I open it up that we've got ES6 syntax ready to go. Because we're using Create React App, it sets up Babel, it sets up Webpack, all of this stuff for us, so we don't have to, and that's fantastic. But some important things. To use React, every single file with JSX in it needs to import React. Absolutely must. If you don't, can't use any JSX. That sucks. And then we have the React DOM. This is what we're actually going to render React with, right? And then, interestingly enough, we have this import index.css. Now, this is just a regular CSS file. But the cool thing about React and these Webpack tools and stuff is you can just do import and then your CSS file, and the CSS applies. Right? You don't got to use a link tag or anything. It'll automatically do that for you. It just applies it. So if you ever have CSS that's related to a specific component, as we'll see here in a moment, you can just directly import it into that component's file, and then your CSS, JavaScript, HTML, it's all in one place. It's nice and containerized, right? That's how we like it. And then the only other thing in here that's important for us right now is we're importing the app component from this app.js file. And that is the actual React code, right? Other than this React DOM.render, where we say, hey, we're going to take this app, we're going to render it, and we're going to render it to the root element from the DOM. So this is just normal JavaScript right here, document.getElementById, that root div that I showed you. It's like, hey, get this, and then attach React to it, basically. Now, what's funny about React syntax, as we've probably seen from the docs and stuff, is that we have this HTML-looking stuff. This looks a lot like HTML, but it's not. It's React JSX. And you'll notice one thing, and it's capitalized. Have to be capitalized. React uses lowercase elements to be HTML elements. And everything that's capitalized is a React component. So if you have your components and they're not capitalized, React will fail. So that's the caveat of React that you have to remember, but it's not a big one. And it's a nice distinction, right? Anything that's capitalized, I know it's a component just by looking at it. I don't even got to guess what it is. Any questions with this file before we jump into actual React code? More in depth, I suppose. So this is the entry point, right? This is our... This one right here?
Yeah.
No. This comes with Create React App. It's some stuff they give you to help with like offline re-rendering and stuff. Not important if you removed it. Pretty much no one would know. Except for certain scenarios. But you're probably not going to run into those for a while. I honestly don't even know everything it does. I've never even used it. So... Alright, so why don't we look at the app.js. So the app.js is a true blue React component. Now it's a class-based component. When you read through the docs, you probably saw that you could do them as a function or a class. And class-based is kind of becoming the old school way of doing it. There's new ways now in React even that you don't really ever need classes if you don't want them. I'm not super up to date with them yet. I'm going to go figure that out before we get further in, but... yeah, these classes kind of the old school way, but it's the easiest way to make your React components, in my opinion. At least one that has any sort of sophistication. So you'll notice, like I said earlier, you need to import React. Absolutely need to import React. Now, quick note, in your import statement, so remember how we had named exports and default export? This file has both. This is the default export, React. And there's also a named export called component. So when you have both in one file, which is totally valid to do, this is how you import them. Another cool thing about this Webpack React environment is we actually have a .svg. We literally have an image And we just import it in and use the image in our code. Like, woohoo, you know, we don't have to do anything fancy. We don't have to put the source file there, you know, we don't have to link to it. You just import it on in and drop it, and React will take care of the rest. Now, there are implications by doing this, but they're not important yet. And really, they're kind of a religious war anyway, so it's up to you. But, what was that? Yeah, well, that's just a term, you know. So again, with the CSS right here, there's actually special CSS for this app component that's only related to the app component. So you can just import it on in with the app component, and it will only apply when that app component is there, which is pretty nice. All right, so we have an ES6 class. It's got the same name as what we want our React component to be. It's capitalized, app, right? Even though we're doing an export default, we don't necessarily need to call it app anywhere else, but it's usually good practice to do so. And it extends component. So it's inheriting some information about these React components automatically for us. There's not a lot of work we got to do, and that's okay. The most important thing with a React component when it's built like this as a class is you need this render function. Now this is a function that gets called when the virtual DOM is being built. It actually gets back this HTML block, and then it knows how to, you know, put them all together to build the HTML you're going to see on the page. So right here, this is just pretty much HTML. There's some slight differences. So, you know, class name is app. We have, oh, I guess that's one of the main differences. Notice we're not using the word class. We're using class name with a capital N. That's because certain attributes that exist in both React and HTML, like class, for instance, is a JavaScript keyword. So you can't just have class right here in your HTML because it'll be like, hey, is that JavaScript? Is that HTML? I don't really know. So class name is a distinction here. There's another one too, for. You can't use HTML label for. It's actually HTML4 is what it's called in React. Because for is a keyword in JavaScript, so can't be in both places. But anyway, we have our class name. Slight difference if you want to specify classes, but they work all the same. You know, you could do this, separated with a space. It's just how you say, hey, we've got a class. We have a header tag. It's got a class. Inside the header tag, we have an image tag. Now, it's slightly different here because this source has curly braces around the logo. And that is because we are using the JSX like expression braces, right? You need these curly braces to inject variables or expressions into your React code. Otherwise, it'll just be like, logo, what's that? It'll think you hard-coded literally LOGO into the HTML element, and it'll freak out. So because this is imported in, and we're not actually referencing it by its path, right? The logo.svg path, we need to pass it in with these curly braces like it's a template literal, right? Like a string literal. We can set the class name, alt. Alt is the same, source is the same. They're not JavaScript keywords, so they're a-okay. In here, this is just a normal p tag. There's literally nothing crazy with an embedded code tag. And then we have pretty much a normal a tag. Again, nothing crazy other than the class name is slightly different. So the HTML is very, very similar. They're just slight caveats, right? You can't just put stuff there. You need to use the curly braces if it's going to be anything of consequence. If it's not just a literal string, it needs to have those curly braces. And then we're returning this block. It's treated almost like an object. It's surrounded by parentheses here. And return from the return function like it's an object that we're going to render, which it is. It looks like HTML here, but that's just JSX trickery. It's not really one. So, if I run this really quick so we can look at it again, I'll show you. This is what we end up with. Now the DOM, when we looked at it in that simple HTML file, was nothing but this div ID root right here. But now if you open it up, oh, there's our class app. Oh, interesting. Right here. It's a div. Right? Open that up. Oh, here's our app header. Okay. In there, well, we should have an image tag, a P tag, and an A tag. Oh, sure enough. And look, it automatically referenced the path for you. It added the logo and added the alt. Here's our P tag with our code in there. It's right here. Here's our A tag that goes to reactjs.org. So it ends up taking that app component. You'll notice that there's nothing in this DOM, though, other than this class name right here that says app. There's no HTML element that says app, right? Even though right here we have this HTML element that says app, this HTML element looking thing, it pretty much just strips that away and gives us this. And again, look at, this is right where we put the logo. This is what it looks like in the actual HTML. It's not quite the same in our code as it is on the HTML because it's an expression. So we need those curly braces to be able to, boom, drop it in there so React can do its magic and actually put what needs to be in there. If we go look at the sources, you'll be able to see page. There's this Webpack source. This is the compiled code. Or if you want to look at the actual source, you can. Here's the like a debuggable version. You can go in, see what's going on. So Webpack's nice enough to at least give us that. We can see the actual debug code, and then we can see what gets dumped out at us. This is just some extra Webpack crap. But you can notice that it is vastly different than what we coded, right? Here you go, main chunk. This is the actual code that Webpack produces for us to be our React app. It's pretty heinous. It's all good. Anyway, point being, behind the scenes, there's just a whole bunch of JavaScript that tells us when we render our app to create this beautiful little chunk of HTML. Now what's nice is to create React app if we want to make any changes. There it is. It's got hot reloading, right? Built in, so that NodeMon stuff we've all learned to love, it's just built in. So that's nice. We got it. Yeah, if you really break it, it'll mess up and you'll have to restart it. That's just if you like seriously do something terrible and you're in the middle of something and you save your files when they're just not even close to being ready. It'll just be like, bleh, you broke it. But it's easy. Control C, yarn start, you're good. You're back. So, any questions on what we've seen so far? We're going to walk through the next example together. And kind of see how it works, but this is a really basic. This is what you get if you run create React app right now. You get this. Any questions on this thing? I know it's kind of funny to ask that question, right? Because there's probably a ton of questions you have no idea what's going on. It's okay. Yeah. You have a question?
That was the question.
That was a question?
So what's hot reloading?
Yeah, it's when you save and it just shows up on the page.
Is there a code?
Yeah, it's starting it yourself. It's what you've been doing this whole time. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're all going to do this together now. The next example is activity number 2. You don't need to do it with me, but I'm going to just walk through it with everyone, give another example together, so we can go real slow and kind of just like work through it. But I want everyone to at least participate on their machines. So the first thing we're going to do is create React app. So create React app, and I'm going to call it Hello World on mine. You can call it whatever you want. I do not. My machine is freaking out. I lost my place on the lesson plan. My bad. Oh. What am I doing? We're good. We're back. Okay. So activity number 2 has a source folder in it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go into my Hello World app. I'm going to do rmrf on the source folder. Okay? I'm deleting it. This is in the Create React App Hello World that I just created. Now if I go find activity number 2, damn it. Right here in the unsolved, there's this source folder. We're just going to copy it, drag it on over. We're replacing the source that did exist with this new source. And we're going to kind of walk through it together and see how exactly it's working. Make some changes to it, kind of play with it. Alright, so create React app, give it a name, open that bad boy up, delete the source folder, find activity number 2 under week 19, grab that source folder and replace it where the other one used to be. Everyone with me? Who is not? Who needs a little bit more time? Alright. Give you a couple more minutes. No problem. We're going to be doing this a couple times today, replacing the source with like the activities code, so be ready for it. It's going to come more than once. So I'm just going to leave that open.
Question.
Yes.
So like in the script, you got a start. So when you want to run the type npm start to run the application, you can package it.
Got to install first.
But yeah, sometimes they give people instruction to put run before the start, npm run start. What's the run for?
npm, good question. So Adam's question, if you couldn't hear in the back, was sometimes people say with npm you should do npm run start versus npm start or npm run some command. You don't have to do run before start, ever. npm has a few built-in commands, start, test, build, I think, a couple others that are just there, and you can just do npm start, npm test. However, any custom commands you come up with, say dev or build special or something like that, you need to prefix it with run for some reason, and so you have to do npm run in your command. Now with Yarn, you don't do that. It's just yarn and then command. Another thing that's better about Yarn. So that's it. Yeah, I don't know why. It's just how they do it. Alright, so once you got that all moved over, get back into your Hello World app or whatever and type yarn just to make sure everything's installed. Now that we changed the source, it should be because we use Create React App. But yarn is the same as npm install when you go to a new package, right? Just type in the word yarn. It's going to install everything. FS Invents is not important. It only works on Mac. Yep, it doesn't work on Linux either. So
using the source folder of the unsolved
from activity 2.
and replacing the one that was just downloaded.
Yes, replacing the source of the one that was just downloaded. Yeah, delete it first or it's going to be a real pain in the ass. Alright, I'm going to open this code. Everything's hunky-dory, but the source has changed. Right? We don't have any of the weird extra stuff. And we don't have anything too crazy, but we no CSS or anything, right? We just have the app.js component and then a hello React.js component. So let's look at our app.js. This is actually probably the most basic form of React component. We can make it even more basic if we wanted to. And you could just do return div hello. That is like the most basic. But we're going to go a little bit cooler than that on this first one. So if we return the hello React, that's literally what it is, right? It's a p tag. This is hello world. Most basic app you can get, but this one shows two components talking. So app is our main component. It's like, you can imagine this is our home page. This is like everything, right? And then in there, there's a subcomponent, hello React, which is just this little bit of code that we might want to reuse over. Maybe we want to print hello React 8,000 times, so we just put it in a loop and print 8,000 of them. Note this is an export default and all that fun stuff. So we've got it all transferred over. It's good. You can type yarn start. Should open it up. And it'll eventually say, hello world. Oh, it's so cute. It's kind of chopped off here on your guys' screens, but it looks good on mine. Everyone here at this point? It's got to do the whole initial boot up time, so Webpack's got to build the code and do all this other stuff and then render it. The render time itself is really short. It's just Webpack building it and bundling it and all that. It takes a while. No, it'll shut down the page altogether. So just leave it running until we're done. But remember, another caveat, make sure you shut this down when we're done with this exercise, or every time you start a new React app, it's to say, hey, you got something running on port 3000, you want to do it on another port. And they'll go, oh yeah, totally. And that'll be on 3001. You'll do it again and be like, hey, you got something running on all these ports. You want to keep doing it? And you'll keep saying yes. And then we're in this big old rigmarole where you got 50 React apps running, and I can't help you anymore, and you got to restart your machine. So, remember to Control-C, and I'll remind you. So this is our React app. Let's just open up the Chrome DevTools just to look, just to peek in. Oh, that's it. P-tag, hello world. Nice and simple, right? Nothing too crazy. You can see the JavaScript that's being injected right here at the bottom. So these are the things that Webpack creates, these bundles and chunks and stuff. Sound real tasty. Want a bundle of chunks? I do. Feels great. All right. So why don't we make some changes? Where can we make changes? What can we do? Well, the first place to start is like hello React.js. Go ahead and go in this file and add some HTML and try to get it to work. Now remember, your best bet is to wrap this in parentheses right now, so if you add multiple lines, you don't get any problems. Also note, you might run into this problem. JSON JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. See if anyone can figure that one out. Paste the second p tag right under the first one. See if we can figure out how to make that render. What? I can't hear you. Try it. This used to not work, but it works now. The alternative is to wrap it in a div and make sure you have one parent element. So if you run into that problem, you can either return an array of elements or just return one. For now, just focus on returning one element. So you should always have one parent element returned from a component that has all its children. So if we're going to add stuff to this hello world, add it inside this div. Or span, or p tag, whatever you want it to be. Yes. Maybe if you want to feel really crazy, add a new file. Hello React.css. And add something in here. If you wrap it in brackets like an array, it'll work. But don't do that yet. Wrap it in parent tag. Oh, nice. Got some CSS up in here.
5 refresh, so nice.
It's very nice.
So if you've got many components like header, body, then you keep that to the app.
Probably, yeah. Usually. So take a moment now. You played with this a little bit. Go through these 3 files, hello React, app.js and index.js, and kind of just play with them for a little bit. Kind of see if you can start to build some intuition as to what's happening.
If you grenade it, you see control Z forward.
If you grenade it, what? Yep, in a div. I wrapped it in a div and I wrapped that in parentheses. Okay. Fist of 5, how do we feel right now? I know there's a lot we don't understand, but how do we feel about what we've covered? Okay. Any questions out there that I can, lingering questions that I can answer? Something that's...
Move past like the part where stuff was actually written on the screen. We answered 2 questions about people that have already had stuff. I still don't have anything on the screen.
Okay. Stephanie or Chris, you want to help Andy?
We're just going.
Got one question.
What?
I see localhost 3000 on the network.
Yep.
So we can reach that.
Localhost 3000 in your browser.
How about the
Standpoint of it.
IP?
You might be able to reach fine. You can try. Go nuts.
I mean, I got a 7.1, so I'll try.
Where's that in the file? It takes you to port 3000.
You can't see this? It's hidden.
I hit your page. Really?
It has the red and all that.
Let's look at that. What is your 131?
Then use an X to it?
You can override the port somehow, but I think in the package JSON you can override the port, but for now it's all hidden from you.
Okay.
That's what the create React app scripts do when you do yarn start.
I was kind of confused why I had everything like so many different places too.
Like what?
It's like the app imports hello React or whatever.
Yes.
And then the index imports the app.
Yes.
So why not like I don't know why. Just like it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, this is a really simple example, so it doesn't make sense why there's so many components. That might be part of it. But in a real React app, you're going to usually have React render is going to render just an app or something, and the app's going to have a whole bunch of other stuff in it. And this is just a pass-through of a bunch of components, and that's what it's supposed to be a picture of.
Yeah.
A real simple version.
The index just renders your app.
Yes, the index should just render your app. It should not do anything special.
But then the app goes.
Mhm.
Then the app just renders the hello React, doesn't it?
It does right now, but if you wanted to add more to it, so say in here, say you wanted to return you could easily do something like this. And then if I go look at my browser, there you go. So the point of the nesting here is just to show you how you can import components into components. But that's not all you got to start at. You can mix components with HTML all day long if you want. And you usually have to, right? Make a little bit more sense?
Yeah.
You don't sound convinced. At least you're not convincing me.
Well, I don't know. It's kind of making more sense.
It will take a while. It's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other lingering questions right here, right now? If we're done here, make sure you Control C on this process. Before we move on to the next activity, Control C on this process. Then we're going to move to the next activity, activity 3, Hello Div. Where you're going to go ahead and you're going to do the same thing, create React app, you're going to copy the source folder, and you're going to make a few changes. Yeah, you just delete the source and drop the new one into the new folder, sure. Use the same stuff, no problem. So take your time on this, work in groups. Work in groups. I know it doesn't seem like a whole lot, it doesn't seem like it'll be hard, but React is new and very intimidating, in my opinion. So work in groups to get this done. Spend plenty of time. Activity number 3. It's Hello Div.
No. Facebook created this probably when they needed to sell it. Doing the crazy stuff. Copy and pasted that first time? You don't have to. Well, I don't know where you made that app. I made it. Yeah, but you're gonna have to do create. Yeah, create that app and then name it something. You have to make a new app, or you just reuse the same app you made the first time. Either delete the source folder or rename it to something that isn't the source, and then copy and paste it. Like, look, I named it my app when I did the first one, and then I did the first. This is the first activity. This is example 2. So I just renamed it so I know which one it is, and then this one is one more than it. Yeah, I already created it. Okay, yeah.
I think it's just like this.
No, you want to use the source file.
Just make
sure
sure
you copy it.
the same track.
Wherever whatever app you're using, you want to start.
Well, if inside the terminal, it'll tell you what's going on.
Well, at least this one.
Inside the terminal.
Yeah, but you know,
I'm talking about it now. Yes,
You can
oh, yeah. So, terminal there, and you did that yellow star.
Oh, wait.
My time didn't show me.
Okay, automatically open up the phone.
Alright, can you do that create rapid drag afterwards? Oh, no, so it does, I don't know if you use those on, yeah, but when you start it and everything, you save the file, it'll reuse the file for you. So you don't, like, when you start it, every time you save it, it'll tell you the file.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I think I screwed up.
Because you like 5 or 10 minutes for this one.
I know a lot of React, but if I'm not there,
Oh, really? Where are they?
people say React.
That's interesting. That's
Yeah. Like for the environment.
But I don't think people view it that way. I had a good conversation last week. I said, if you get my buddy, Sal. That's it. Sal was actually last week. He's a really smart guy. He's probably the one who have all their hours.
Where I work. And then they got probably they hired like scrap metal people back in like October. Return again, make them funny. Right now this is just return null, and I forgot how to make it. Return. You have to return that. You have to return that using just HTML, that's it.
That's how I feel. Every time I had
Okay, so you don't get that last you're gonna do one page.
might not have this, might not have that, but it has all the stuff already. I just need to talk in, add some HTML templates.
Oh, you need to import. Yeah. Well, what was
Yeah.
So then you can do this next part. So they want you to put it on with there. You can do it. You can wrap it in here too. So you have to wrap it in, or you can wrap it in an array.
How are people feeling on this exercise right now? If I said we're done, we're going over it, freeze. Feeling okay? Couple more minutes. Take a couple more minutes. Yeah, I don't care, Justin. A couple more minutes. Keep working on it, and then we'll go over it together.
I already had an array and wanted to make a list for all the things.
Yeah, watching the broadcast
I mean, I would,
and literally twice.
I don't see why you wouldn't be able to, because as long as it's job
Okay, let's go over this example. So what I did is I just copied the unsolved source over to the last example, blew away the old stuff, starting fresh here. So we need to make our changes in the hellodiv.js file. So we're going to need to add an H1 or something along those lines. It says, hello, my name is, Carson, I guess is my name. And then an unordered list with 3 things that you like. Can be anything. So this file, we can go ahead and do that. So we're going to need a nice div is like our container, because we need to return 1 element unless we're doing something special. So we want a headline tag. We're going to just do H1. Hello, my name is Carson. But, oh, interesting. Getting these red squigglies. VS Code is actually giving me a helpful hint. React must be in scope when using JSX. There's one thing that I said earlier that you always need if you're using React, and that is to import React. If you don't, it just won't work. Okay, so we have an H1 tag. That's all well and good. So if we want to do an unordered list, it's just a UL. 3 things you like: code, dogs, food. Those are my 3 things I like: code, dogs, and food. I can do yarn start. And boom. Hello, my name is Carson. Code, dogs, and food. Any questions on this example? This is the only file we had to change. The rest of them were ready for us. Basically, you import React, you wrap it in curly braces, and then you just type your HTML like you normally would in this example. I hear a lot of chatter. Are there questions out there I can answer? Issues? Yeah, Jaime?
I get compiled with warnings.
You're supposed to create a React app, or are you trying to, did you have it, like you're trying to run it out of the unsolved? Are you trying to start it? That's why you're.
I think there's some tapping issue.
Yeah, there's a tapping issue. Is it running?
Any questions? Outstanding questions about this example that I can answer? No? No? Heather says no, emphatically. No. Alright, let's take a 15-minute break. See you at 8:15. Control C before you leave. God. Uh-huh. Yes, because it's JSX. Yeah, I agree with her. Go Scorched Earth if you want to create a new one. Or put it in a nice high directory that's kind of away from all that stuff. Yeah, so you can kind of manage it really here. Have I done it? Well, you were using it by default. Yeah, if you have React 16 involved. Now, I don't remember if all the fiber components are done yet, but you're using it.
And then what you're gonna do, oh, I know how to do it. For each, and then, so put, like, whatever you're gonna call the data, right, in the return.
Yeah, no kidding.
Just like anything. And then, so you do this, when you return.
Yeah, same here. I'm having the exact thing
Yeah,
up here.
because I was like, I'm looking up there, like, that looks like Brinksy. you're gonna return.
I've done it trying to look at someone's monitor, someone's screen, laptop screen, and I'm like, what's the next
Data
one?
dot,
No, that's right.
I don't know, what would it be like, would it be a pen? Or, because you essentially need to build out now the list element, you know, in a string, and then pass it the data from the loop.
Start working today for this company.
Huh?
Footprint. And they, like, all day, the guy was like, I need you to do research on this, and this, and this. Like, all day, I was like doing that. And I'm thinking, like, it's gotta be a way easier way to do the research. Just like going to someone's, like, website and stuff and just pull everything I needed to send it to him. So, like, it should take me like 8 hours to go through, like, company, like, you know, the names, email, whatever, phone number to do. That's sweet. And it's like, it's helping a lot, like I work too. So,
Nice.
yeah. It's pretty chill. And I was like, yeah, just, you know, as long as you get your hours, you can kind of make your schedule or whatever. And then just do it. But, oh, that's sweet.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, and they're like, tomorrow, which at another company, like, for them, they're like, everybody showed that, you know, and stuff.
That's cool.
That was weird at first because I was like, I was so macromanaged before working for banks and stuff.
Yeah.
Now going to different environments, you know. Learning through this.
That's cool, man. Good job.
Oh, look, there's an entire list, page for what we're actually trying to do. Under the React.js.org docs, it's in the main concept section. It's number 8. Rendering multiple components. So you would do what we would call, you got a map it. You know, use your map and put. Does that make sense?
No, it's not.
Or would that turn them all in one line? Does map iterate through the array? Does the map function iterate through the entire array?
Yes.
So you would need a 40.
Well, there's different implications. Map's going to return a new array. For each is not. And so with a map, if you were going to do something other than transform the array, you should think about it seriously. Because that is all a map is supposed to be used for. Could you, like, do other stuff? As long as it's not asynchronous? Yes, but should you? No.
We're essentially like that last activity is just to build your 3, like put an unordered list, whatever. So we're trying to like build an array and then just loop through it to build the list elements. And the docs are saying to use map.
Yeah, you can map over stuff and return JSX. No problem. You can also, instead of returning like a parent div, you can return an array of elements, and that works. And it automatically renders them.
Oh yeah, that's how I remember it. Oh, because what they're doing is they're mapping they're taking the original array and then transforming each individual entry in that array to have the li tags, so that when you move through the second one later, you don't have to rebuild the li's. They're already built for you. Because like that second, that list items array, the first index is actually going to be a string of open li, the number one close li, and then set it up for the rest of them without actually messing up the numbers array.
So if you want to include
That's what they're doing.
like say for instance you want to do the.
Do you put that inside of their recurring token?
Put it in there.
Unless there's like a package for it.
Package that you can actually.
I think you can do it outside.
You can just put the references in there.
I'm gonna try it doing it outside.
Like the old process.
Yeah, you could. You gotta know how to properly create and break the gap. You can use jQuery for that if you want. It's just too heinous.
But you can use the scraper inside there too.
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, you can't scrape websites to use React. You get that.
Yeah, you get that garbage. Which is what a lot of like the New York Times and those guys are doing, right? They use a lot of that React or other stuff. Because when I look at it, it's a lot of. You look at the code itself. I mean, a lot of it's minimized also, but there's so much stuff in there you can't really tell.
Well, if you get back a really small HTML file, but you have this really like grand page, you know they're using something like that. Maybe not React, but something like that. There are ways you can do it like that, if you know how to. Because there are services that you can like route the traffic through so that it knows the React and you actually React right in the column. So it's a lot harder.
You mentioned on Saturday that when we're returning single line, if your arrow function only returns one thing, you don't need. Oh, you don't need the curly braces. And you also don't need the return keyword.
And you can do that with React.
Yeah, I was looking at their docs and I was like, well, they have an arrow function but no curly brace, and I was wondering if it's because, but they have it broken off into like a second line, so I was like, I wasn't sure if
it's still a single line, though, and it's a semicolon. That's why you want semicolons, though.
Yes. So then, what you do here. Yeah. So, you got the word? Yeah. So, when you build an array, this is so fun, dude. It's really cool. It's really interesting, actually. So what you're doing is you take your initial array, and then you're creating a second array, and you're mapping each element of your first array to the second one. But you're building your LI still. So all you have to do here is in your workers just inject this entire array. You don't loop through it. You just
Special things you need to do to make navigation.
just inject, because it's expecting an HTML injection. Yeah. So if you're just and because look, you see how I have everything wrapped in. Remember I mentioned you can pass in an array. That's essentially what this is. You're essentially passing in another array in there, kind of like we did with handlebars. And you're just telling it, hey, just print everything that's in this array. And everything in that array happens to be a list, an LI with something attached to it. So then it's just every index of that array is just an LI. So it's like it sees an array of LIs and it's like, oh, you're inside a UL. And it's the way you're supposed to.
Mine printed
We didn't have a lot of some people swear by it. Never use any state laws.
Yeah, trying to
do with that.
See, passing an LI, you having an LI of your initial first ingredient array. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that makes it pretty cool. Yeah, that didn't ever. Essentially just passing React on a shit ton of arrays, and it's just like, oh, are you wrapped in an HTML element? Yes, okay. Weird.
All right, why don't we get started again? Everyone's back. Sounds good. Where are you going? Okay, you got 4 more minutes. We'll wait for you, bud.
We were expanding our learning during break.
It's okay. We can wait for him. We have 4 more minutes. No, it's definitely not the newest. But it's probably the winner in the front end space. There's a lot of things that do that. It's just people really like how it works. It's pretty intuitive, and it's easy. It's easy to kind of mold it into your own process and stuff like that. People like that about it, for better or for worse. What was that? Keys today? No, I don't think so. Yeah. Yes. There's a version of React called React Native, and you use that to, and it's a little different than the React we're doing. There's some different things you have to do. Yeah, it builds a mobile app. It compiles to Android and iOS and all that stuff. Well, the React Native ones are, but I mean the mobile apps themselves can be the native languages and stuff. So there are a lot of React Native apps, but definitely they're not the majority of the market. I guarantee that. All right, let's get started. So we just played with a little React application, right? Where we added one little component with some information about ourselves and all that, just to kind of see how we can add HTML to these components and kind of how they render, right? Some of the other things we need too. So we always need that React imported. But let's take that similar example and kind of amp it up a bit, and we'll add some Bootstrap in. So right here we've got a nice big old nasty block HTML that's got a whole bunch of Bootstrap in it. And this is not ideal to have this much HTML just kind of like blob there. But it is what it is, and for this example it works. But this is all we got right now. I'm going to go ahead and run it so you can see what it actually looks like. So this is what we get. It's not particularly beautiful. Bootstrap, we're missing something.
It's missing. You're missing the Bootstrap reference.
We're missing the Bootstrap reference. So it's really quite simple. The HTML page hasn't really changed, and the function of the HTML page hasn't changed. If we add a CDN link in, we have magical Bootstrap. That's pretty easy, right? That's not much different than the way we were doing it. The only difference is we have the Bootstrap classes, the same classes inside of this React component. So we still have our div container and our div jumbotron. We have our buttons, right? And all that fun stuff. It's just in a React component. It's just returned all the way through the chain. Just like the other app. There's really nothing to it here that's much different than what we have done, other than we're using the Bootstrap classes. And again, the index.html is literally an HTML page. You need to reference Bootstrap, great. You need to reference Google APIs, great. You need to reference jQuery for some ungodly reason, great. You can. Now, I don't recommend that one, but you can do it. Either way, it's pretty trivial to add Bootstrap, right? CDN link is what we were doing before. You add the CDN link, and then you just reference the classes. And React, through the magic of the web, knows what to do. Because React's not doing anything special. All it's doing is writing to the DOM eventually, right? And those DOM elements, they have the classes that Bootstrap needs, and then it applies the CSS, and we're off to the races. We have Bootstrap. Any questions on this little example? Everyone feeling okay about it? In the index.html and the head tag, just like normal. They have had an HTML, but we've not looked at it. They've been in this public folder, and it's just not changed. So that's, remember, this div ID root, that's basically our application. We just wander on in here. I added a link to Bootstrap all willy-nilly like. Then in my React, I just reference those classes. All willy-nilly like, yeah. You just reference the classes and there you go, you got Bootstrap. The important point here is that your HTML that you would normally write for Bootstrap isn't much different. Yeah, okay, we're doing it in React now, but if we're just doing a layout, really there's not a whole lot going on that you wouldn't do in the regular HTML. You just now put it in a React function. Questions? Comments? Concerns?
Did you say to not use Bootstrap in React? Or something like that?
No, jQuery.
Oh. Never mind.
jQuery is totally useless with React. There is not a single reason you need it. And that is why jQuery is becoming less and less popular. Because applications like, or libraries like React are taking over, and jQuery is totally useless. I mean, you don't need it. What do we use jQuery for? Manipulating the DOM. We're literally building the DOM right here in React, so there's no better way to manipulate it. Any questions on this? Anything else? Move on to activity 5, where you're going to be taking something similar to this with a whole lot less code, and you're going to be adding Bootstrap on into your example. They give you the CDN link, so don't worry about that. If you would like to just replace the source from the existing ones, you can. Create a new app, you can. However you want to do it, but you just got to copy the source over to a new app so you can work with it. Because they just give you the source. Alright?
complete the source file, the next activity is to, well, you've been creating a new application of this folder. Where it says, you can use the same application folder that you created in any of the previous ones and just copy the next source activity into that. You have to either delete or rename the source in the existing activity. I can rename them just so I have all of my examples like that. Yarn tells you when your apex are valid.
It's a pretty nice tool, huh? Okay, let's go over this example. So, we were given some code that in here basically did nothing. And your job was to replace that with a new component, Hello Bootstrap, that it would render in the app. And Hello Bootstrap had to render a navbar, jumbotron, and a card. So the first thing you'd have to do is go in here and add a CDN link, whoop, right into your HTML. Right? If you don't do that, you're not getting any styles. We can run this just to make sure that that's all working. Looks good. It's got a navbar, jumbotron, and a card. So here we can go look at the beauty that is one giant React component with a bunch of HTML in it. So with Bootstrap, we got to start with a container, right? And with React, we have to return one element theoretically. So why don't we make that outermost div our container? From there, we can go ahead and build out our navbar. So you could copy this example almost verbatim from the website. And then replace the class with class name. And that pretty much takes care of it. Keep your hrefs as this the pound sign, the octothorpe, right? But then you've got yourself a jumbotron. So if we look at the navbar, or navbar, I'm sorry. Here's the navbar docs. You could pretty much copy this, and then just replace class everywhere with class name. If I wanted to do that, say this was class, I could do class, and then you could go replace class name, just like that. Or hit F2 would also do it. So for the jumbotron, similar. You just need to give it a class name jumbotron. Now notice this is still nested in that container component, just like with normal Bootstrap. And you just put some HTML in there, nothing crazy. And then with the card component, similar story. You have your classes related to the Bootstrap classes. So we have a card header, card title. And all this is effectively just HTML aside from the class to class name conversion. Any questions on the basic example? Alright, let's look at the more advanced example. So just delete the source, boom. Here's the source from the bonus. Open up the code. So if I yarn start this, we have the same thing. But now in my components, I actually have 3 components. Card, jumbotron, and navbar. Chunked out into a little bit more reasonable pieces. So here's that navbar. It's exactly the same as when it was nested in the just the Hello Bootstrap component, except it doesn't have a container around it, right? It's just the navbar. And the navbar is a single element, so you can just return that. You replace all the class with class name, and you have a navbar. It's in its own component. Function navbar, export default navbar. It imports React. Similar thing with the jumbotron, import React. It's a function called jumbotron. It just returns the HTML we're going to need for the jumbotron. Export default here. Same with the card, just a function. Returns the HTML we'd have in the card. Class is replaced with class name. And the magic happens in the app. Now we can import all 3 of those components. Right? We can wrap all of them in a container. You can mix the JSX components with HTML, JSX HTML. You need to most of the time. Right? And when we go look at the example after it's rendered, you'll see that there's not going to be any extraneous tags in there that represent like app. It just goes straight to container. I don't see anything that says navbar. It is the nav with the class navbar, but that's the HTML that was inside the navbar component, right? The Jumbotron, it's the same thing. That's the HTML that was inside the Jumbotron component, and card is the HTML that was inside the card component. So those components are stripped away. Really, they're just containers for your HTML, and eventually when React puts them on the DOM, they just boom, blow them away. We don't need the components anymore. It's all on the DOM. Yeah, Rolando?
Why do you, when you import one of those components, they have to be capitalized?
Yes, they have to be capitalized because that's how React tells between components and HTML. Any questions on this example?
So in some Bootstrap stuff, like a hamburger menu, like some drop-downs and stuff uses jQuery, I think. Or like Bootstrap jQuery.
We're not quite there yet.
Oh, okay.
But I know where you're getting to. We can add all that stuff in as well, but we're not quite there yet. Let's make sure this shuts down. Cool. Vista 5, how are we at with React right now? How feeling? Feeling okay? Good, good. Alright, we're going to play with some JSX variables now. Let's open up that. So let's close this. We're going to dump the source. Alright, so everything's back to normal, nothing crazy has happened. We're just going straight through the app to this JSX variables component. Now, as I said earlier, this isn't actually HTML, it's JSX, and because of that, you can't just put stuff in the HTML. If it's anything more than a string, it needs to be injected in to JSX as a variable. And we use these curly braces in JSX pretty much to evaluate expressions. So any variable, if you have a function, it can call it, all kinds of fun stuff, right? It's similar to our template literals that we have with ES6, but it's different in the fact that you can actually like execute JavaScript in there. It's not just rendering something. So here we have three variables, name, number 1, and number 2, just as constants, nothing crazy. We all remember why we use constants? Because they don't change. We have a standard old class, or a div here with a class main container. Remember, class name. We have some nested classes. If we want to put a comment in, you can. You just have to wrap it in curly braces, and it'll just turn into nothing on the page. Now, if we have the name here, Ahmed, and we want to inject that into some HTML, we can, but we need those curly braces. No $sign or anything. Just the curly braces, and you pass the name variable in there just like it's a function, pretty much. And our name will show up in our HTML. So I'll change this to Carson. Change it to 100, 200. So here you can see we can actually do an expression. So we want to do num1 plus num2. We don't have to do it ahead of time and then inject the result. You can do it right there in the curly braces. This isn't just raw variables, it's whole expressions. To take it even further, we want to generate some random numbers. We can do that in our JSX as well. So we can call a couple of functions and add to them and do all kinds of stuff right there in the JSX. Or you want to manipulate a string, you can do that as well. As long as you get a return value that's something in JavaScript, which is effectively every bit of JavaScript, you can render it. Now if you had a function here, you'll get a weird render, but it'll still work. Point being, when you have these curly braces, it literally adds it into the code, or into the HTML. So when we run this, my name is Carson, but you can call me the JSX boss. So if we look right here in the HTML, my name is Carson, just boom, literally, right then and there. right here is where the name is defined. And right here is where it's injected in. And there it is. We want to see some math. I can do math. Here's the 300. Here's num1 of 100 and num2 of 200 added together. In the HTML, literally 300. Our random numbers. They look real weird in the HTML, sure, but they still render how we expect. And then our string. String reversal. And that's all it is. Really, you just put the curly braces around it inside the JSX HTML, and it evaluates it. The same thing works for components, but when you actually pass them into components and not just the HTML, there's something else you have to take into account. We'll get into that later. For now, we're just going to add these. We're just going to use JSX variables on HTML elements. Any questions on JSX and how you use variables with it? What's nice about this is it kind of reminds us of handlebars, where we had the handlebar stuff going on, right? And you have an object and you could kind of like do stuff with it. But it's even more flexible than that because it's literally just JavaScript. It's not some weird language thing. I mean, it is, I guess. But, you know, it's more JavaScript-y than handlebars was. Alright, any questions on this at all? Cool, let's move to activity number 7 then, where we're going to play with JavaScript variables. Yeah, you can use string literals. You don't have to, because you can just put string literals in there, but you can if you want to.
Didn't know we got that in
Are people ready to go over this example? Wow. Okay, we were given this, and we had to replace some of these with JSX variables. So the first thing is we need our name. And we want to insert our name right here. How do we do it? Wow, nice. Pretty unanimous. I like that. Let's skip to the number of letters in our name. Okay. And let's create a variable for our thoughts. What was that? Yeah. So, thoughts, right? Cool. So, what's the last one? We want to strip the vowels out of our name. So, why don't we do another H2? My name without vowels is... So, name, replace. Like so?
I have an I before the G.
You could do it either or, IG, yeah. So this is a compact version that does work. I'm going to show you another way too, so we can show what it looks like as a function. Well, this is one as well. But for those of you that don't remember all the regex stuff, we've kind of briefly talked about it. It says you start a regex with this /, you end a regex with this /, and it says A, E, I, O, or U, any one of them, find them, and replace them with nothing. And then the I and G say I is case insensitive, G is global. Without the I, capital A, capital E, capital I, capital O, capital U will be ignored. Without the G, it'll only find the first one and stop. So when you have I and G, it's ignore case, get all of them. Replace them with nothingness. So this works. Indeed it does. And it's far more elegant for this kind of a problem, but you can also do something like this. It's, you know, effectively the equivalent. Well, remember that the regex, as nice as this looks, is effectively this. You know? It doesn't really get more efficient than this. It kind of does, but... Yes, the low... Well, this one also does 2 lowercase.
No, I mean, that's what the both.
This one?
No, that's what the I does.
The I makes it case insensitive. So you can call the function like so, and they would evaluate to the same thing. So we can keep both. So just so we can see how they work and how they're functionally equivalent. Strip vowels. So let's go ahead and run this. You're liking regex, huh, Rolando? Curson. That's my name without vowels. But you can see they're both the same. So my name is Carson. It has 6 letters. Here it is without vowels using a regex. Here it is without vowels using the old function. And I think React is amazing. Questions on this example? How we use JSX, how we use variables with JSX, how we inject stuff into our JSX. Yes, Nor? Oh, that's a 5? Oh, great. Thank you.
I kind of have a question.
You have a question, Peyton?
Yeah, it's not really about the JSX though. It's with the, so, aren't the components only for, like, rendering the HTML elements? So would it be, like, normal to put that devowel function or whatever in there, strip vowels, like, or do you have it somewhere else?
Like in a different file?
Yeah.
It'd probably make more sense to put in a different file, yeah, for organization. Just because, but a lot of times the React functions do end up having, when they're classes, they end up having other functions attached to them. But only if it's related to that component. But you're on to something, yes, in terms of organization. So it's a good question. Any other questions about this one? Cool. We are going to go move on to another example. We're going to look at some more stuff we can do with CSS. Where's my terminal? There it is. Alright, let's go ahead and yarn start this. Boom. Okay, here's some beautiful, beautiful CSS. Right? We have a nice bright yellowish color. It's beautiful purple. Some nice blues. Anyway, point is, you can add CSS very easily without Bootstrap and all that, right? And I kind of showed you a little bit with the original Create React App example we went through, but we're going to get a little bit more in depth with our CSS and how we can use it with React. So I will leave that there. So here, normal index.js, nothing crazy. Now this is example number 8. App.js is a little bit more complex because we've broken it down into several different components here. There's 5 components. Well, 3 different components and then the card repeated 3 times. But anyway, it's a nice organizational pattern, right? We have one container div and then all of our other components kind of built down so our subcomponents can be really simple. Then here, you can see we have a headers and navbar CSS, and then we actually have our components. So let's look at the card first. The card actually has styles built in. So we have this object that looks kind of like CSS, but it's actually a JavaScript object. And it is being injected into the style keyword. So style is slightly different here in React. Style is actually an object in React. It looks a lot like CSS, but it's not really CSS. It turns into style, like we know it, But for instance, if we wanted to change this to like pixels, we could. And note too that font size in CSS here would look something like that. So you kind of normalize the names of your CSS properties to fit a JavaScript object, and then you can just pass it on in to the style here. So what does it look like inline? Nice little object. It looks kind of like handlebars at this point. Whoa, holy crap. Looks hideously ugly, but that's okay. Or I could just do styles.card. Go back to normal. Same with styles.heading. What if I just wanted to take heading out? I could copy it into this object. Now we're directly referencing the heading just as an object. Nothing's changed. The cards look the same. You can do it all kinds of ways. As long as you get an object in there, it doesn't matter how. You can directly write the object in, you can pass it in as a variable, something along those lines. That's fine, right? But the point is, style in React is not a string. It is not a string, it is an object that you have to pass in, and that's what's kind of tricky about it. And you have to kind of realize that the property names are going to be slightly different. Anything that would have a dash before, instead you get rid of the dash and you uppercase that next letter. So you put it in camel case like we normally do in JavaScript. Questions on this example right here? This objects and how they go in. So, an alternative style is you just reference a CSS file. The CSS file right here in the header JS, or the header CSS, isn't anything crazy. This is normal CSS, and it's just imported in. Now note with this import statement, it's not import as CSS from. It's just a import. Because when you import like this, you just get the effects of the file. And all we want are the effects of the CSS. So we're saying we need this file, but we don't actually do anything with it. So when you compile our code, make sure you include this file. That's really what we're saying. And it's just this, and it's just applied. Here you go. Here's our .header class name header, and then we get our hideous yellow, right? If I make this a much more appealing color, like green. Look at it, it's beautiful. Right? And it changed right for me and everything. Made it a little smaller. You can even change the H1, right? So I can change this to like a gray color. Oop, there it is. Just like normal CSS. Nothing there has changed. Our nav bar, we'll open that up. Why don't we open the nav bar here? Now this one is a mix. You'll see the nav bar, card, and card are similar, right? Right now it's got the whatever this color is. But if I want to replace it with the purple, come on. Nice. That's sweet. Looks cool, huh?
So if you have the CSS file, the class, and the objects file, which one's going to take precedence?
same as in regular. The style always takes the highest precedence because it's directly on the HTML element. And then classes are less than IDs, and selectors are less than classes in terms of precedence. So all the precedence rules still apply. So we could give this the class name as well, and you'll see that the margin's going to stay there, but the background's not going to be this purple. It's dark purple, or even red.
So style, right? So style attributes is special.
Yes.
So would it be better to use style or?
Actually, the opinion is changing. A lot of people still went with CSS for a long time, but people are starting to think that embedded styles aren't so bad in React because everything's right there, right? And you're sharing the component. It depends, though, on what you're doing, and it depends on a lot of things, and there's more sophisticated ways than just passing styles object in. But it's a good question, and it really depends on how you like doing it. So any questions on the different ways we can use CSS and styling from React?
Yeah, you could effectively strip the style object out of there and put it in that CSS file and then just import. Would you be able to import a file that has the objects for styling
Instead of like the actual CSS?
Right, yeah.
I'll say JavaScript syntax.
Yeah, it would
Well,
have to be
yeah,
JavaScript file.
through.
Or just export the whole thing.
Yep. Same thing. It's not mad here. We're all good. So yes, absolutely. It's just JavaScript syntax at that point. So anything you could do with the exports or imports is totally valid. Any other questions here? Cool. Well, we're going to jump to activity number 9, which is working with CSS and styles. Can I show the image? What? What are you talking about?
Let's just put up the instructions so you can see the colors on the picture.
Oh. Yeah, this is the beautiful monstrosity you're supposed to make.
That victory.
properties are still, you don't have to tell at least the actual property line quotes, right? It would still be regular CSS.
If it's in quotes, it can't be. It's got to be camel cased.
Not the property, not the object property, but like what you're setting it to.
The value?
Yeah.
Well, that's just, yeah, that's the value as
Just
it would
raw
be.
CSS.
Yeah.
It's coming, man.
There's another one on Wednesday. Oh, gosh.
Well, what is our Saturday class?
All right, we ready to go over this example?
Yeah. Except font size isn't changing the font with that.
Well, we'll look at what could potentially be going wrong. All right, let's start with the header. The header is supposed to be an ugly red with a big font size, right? So what we have right now is this. Yep, we have this. That's the header. And it's supposed to look something like this. Whoa. So, we can create some styles. And let's call it header style. So this is going to be the background on the header itself, and then we're going to change the font size on the H1. We'll call it heading style. And right here we can just go ahead and do style, styles, that heading style. So if we go ahead and save it, boom. Header done. Everyone good with that?
So if you do it in CSS, you need to camel case, right?
If you do it in like CSS, it's just regular CSS. Yeah, that hasn't changed. So the nav bar, the background is going to be green, and we are moving the content all the way to the end here. So I'm going to cheat. Boom. I'm really good at typing. We're going to make the background green, justify content flex end, and it'll just move for us. So we go styles equals styles dot navbar style. We load it up. It doesn't work. Did I put it on the wrong thing? Oh, whoops. Style, not styles. My bad. Anyway, there we go.
Why is it that that particular, in that instance, it modifies the A tag, but say if you were to do it in the header one, I tried to change the pixel size of just the header, not the actual H1, it wouldn't change the size.
I do not know what you mean. Are you talking about like it wouldn't shrink past this?
So I didn't split up the object, I just had...
Oh, the CSS on this was probably forcing it to grow or something. Would be my guess. You'd have to look at the CSS. So for the section one, we can look at it after class. We just want the background to be orange. And there we go. Anyone have any questions on using styles and CSS in React? Fistify, how are we feeling about React after today? At least on what we've covered. Mostly pretty good.
Wednesday's a new day, though.
Wednesday's a new day, you're correct. A new day, a whole new set of challenges. Good. Well, today was the first day of React, so hopefully everyone's feeling pretty good about it. Yeah, Michael? Hopefully everyone's feeling pretty good about it. Yeah. I was going to say something else, and I spaced. Got really tired, like, halfway through class. Yeah, I feel you on that. Yeah, it really is. Anyway, I think everyone did a great job today. I know this stuff's really tough. Yeah, we're going to be adding more and more, but if you feel confident at the end of each class, that's all that matters. Go home and practice tomorrow before Wednesday so that you're not in, trying to remember everything. Yeah, Chris? There you go. To supplement your learning here, since you probably will want to do that. Otherwise, yeah, we're chugging right along, so that's all we have for today. Yeah, what's up?
So essentially my styles object was just